Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. So glad that you are tuning in today. And what we're doing is we are in the middle of a series called Dr. Hanson's Case Series. And I've been in practice for 27 years, and I have many cases that I could share with you. And the reason I'm sharing is because a lot of times people may think something's going on, or they may not know if something's going on with their child. And, sometimes when you hear some similarities, it validates what your gut is telling you. I always think mothers should go with their gut. And if something is there, I think you should get it checked out as quickly as possible. The earlier that we get into a situation, the easier it is for the nervous system to move in a positive direction. So I would encourage you, if you ever think something's going on, you can always send me a question. You can look on the website, connectmybrain.com. Under the podcast tab, there are Dr. Hanson's developmental milestones, where it's not all of the milestones, but it's certainly ones that I am highlighting. So today we're going to look at another case, and hopefully if you might be your child, might be somebody that you know, if there's some similarities, share the information and feel free to reach out asking for help. So when the child came to the office, he was 10 years old, and the reason he came in was for emotional dysregulation, a lot of meltdowns, and having trouble focusing. And that is a very common pattern that I do see. So when I go through the history, I do what I call red flags, things that I know can possibly disrupt development and have seen it over and over and over again. So as I move through, I'm just going to highlight some red flags that I found. There was strep in mom's background. During the pregnancy, she experienced fatigue, couldn't fall asleep, dizziness, feeling tired, fear of childbirth, and cravings. Now, we may automatically think that being pregnant and cravings go together hand in hand, and they can, but there can also be other meanings. We know now that whatever the state of health is that mom is going through, it absolutely has an impact on the baby. So you can have cravings without being pregnant. A lot of times those cravings are telling you things that you're missing in your diet, and so your brain needs the breakdown of those items, and therefore there's a craving stimulated in the brain. One of the common features in the symptoms experienced during pregnancy, though, is a lot of fatigue. Okay. And I do find that remarkable, because I'm finding more and more that the kids, when we assess them, they too are fatigued. Morning sickness, went through that for 14 weeks. Mostly didn't enjoy the morning sickness as part of how did you like being pregnant. And then any complications was the strep and a round of antibiotics during labor. And then we go into the birth part, and actually the APGAR score, which is the score that is looking at all the different systems of the baby and relating it. Mom wrote, looked a little gray, then they rubbed him, and then he was fine. I always find that kind of interesting, that we have one presentation and then it's quickly changed, and therefore they're fine. And I did put that in quotes for my podcast audience. Okay. From birth to 12 months, when did your child start eating solids? 6 months. We have sweet potatoes, ice cream. So sugar. And then as we go into the history, we've got ear infections. We have delayed motor skills. We have tongue tie. And then we have a variety of other things, bedwetting. walking difficulties, frequent fevers, and eventually had ear tubes put in. So this is the first part of this child's life under the age of 3, and that is significant, okay? And then now we're asking, is your child struggling with anything in school? And what we've got here is math, language, reading, social, peers, and communication. And then there is a variety of notes personal to that child. So the big picture is there was some chemical stress during the pregnancy with the strep, and then ultimately ending up with antibiotics. And, most of the time we just don't really think anything about that, but a child is going to be impacted by anything mom is going to be given. And we're not going to sit here and say that that's why the baby was gray right at birth, but you have to put the whole package together. What was going on that then the child was in a more sedative, activated system as soon as they got into this world. And then if we don't know how to go in there and look at those systems specifically, then you don't know how the child is ultimately going to adapt. So when we look at children, they're marvelous in their ability to adapt, but that doesn't mean that adaptation means that they get wired up perfectly. They're trying. And so we know in the history that there were delayed motor skills, which come after you get here into this world. So what's going on? What's being halted? And what's being halted is the progression of that child's development. And we're going to break it down into the mechanical, the chemical, and then ultimately the brain, so that we can put those pieces back where they're supposed to be. So now at age 10, you should really be able to do all the things that you're expected to do. So upon evaluation, one of the tools that I use is the metronome. And the metronome is looking at timing between both sides of the body. So we all probably know by now that the right brain, for the most part, not completely, but controls the left side of the body. And then the left controls the right. Now, there's plenty of neurological columns that definitely go same side, but for the most part, we're gonna look at how did these two pieces come together. So when you come into this world, you are dominant right brain. And right brain is big picture, it's big muscles, it's the desire of wanting to be in communication. It is also how you regulate negative emotions. And then what happens at around 18 months is this information is going to shift over to the left-hand side and get remodeled. And this is where it's going to be the detail, the fine motor, and the regulation of positive, happy emotions. So you have function on both sides, but they also do a little bit different in action, and testing the timing tells us what that communication is like. So we look at the left side of the brain as the intellectual quotient, because what's believed is that it has been around the longest. That information was set up on the right, and then its firing potential, its network connections really soared into that left side around 18 months. So different events that go on at that time will be very significant in the maturation of the child. Now, here's an example of a timing situation. If I want to talk, that function is right brain dominant. The work of that talk, putting it together, is on the left. So you have to have the right timing in order to get that communication flowing. And, first, before the last couple of years, what we saw was we had that as a very common factor was language delay. And so breaking those pieces down really helps us identify when did these situations occur and how did they impact the child's development. But we've also got a situation that's been going on for the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, where everybody's been masked up, and it's literally been changing the ability for those open windows of language development to have the sensory input that it needs visually and auditorially to put the pieces together. And then there's also the chemistry of the brain. The chemistry of the brain is also incredibly important when we're trying to look at how do these networks of communication ultimately get wired up and how they function. So in this particular situation, we have a 10-year-old with emotional dysregulation and attention issues. Now, before I give the numbers, I want to talk about the midline of the brain. So there's a part of your brain called the cingulate gyrus. You have an anterior part, a middle part, and a posterior part, and they lie right in the middle. Wow, is this such an important component, not only when we're talking about development, but it's specifically the attention and the emotion. And then talking about how, if we're trying to exchange information, how that midline disruption or dysregulation can really cause incredible havoc on the individual. Okay, so the cingulate gyrus in the anterior part has a lot to do with the emotion. In the posterior part, it has a lot to do with how you pay attention to self, how you see yourself in the world, how you project it into the world. But what you went through in the beginning part of your life is going to be instrumental in how these areas of your brain are going to work. So we look at these histories. We have a history of strep, antibiotic, a little bit of fear going on, and that really is enough. You don't have to have 50 things to say this could potentially cause some change in development. And this is also the beginning of the child's own gut function, immune system, and how they're ultimately going to become wired together. So we look at this midline function just through this one little test, but we also do it through a brain map, which can literally identify either underpower or overpower in these cingulate gyrus areas of the brain. So in my mind, when I'm putting it together, okay, we had some disruption. We got a lot of emotional regulation and attention issues. What's it going to look like to bring the communication to two sides? And then what is the map going to look like? What is the map going to tell me when it comes to how that brain is regulated? Not only on the right or not only on the left, but the midline, how everything is shared back and forth. So in doing the metronome, if you're not aware of it, you can look it up online. It's called interactive metronome. It has feedback. It literally is going to tell you if you're too fast, too slow, or right on. and you're seeing something and you're hearing something. So again, those two special senses of visual and auditory. That's also how neurofeedback works. Visual and auditory. These are our two most powerful senses. And so we're testing to see when you see and when you hear, can you put it together with your body? So they hear a bell and they have to clap with the bell. So for the podcast audience, I'm literally putting my hands together as though I'm clapping, and I'm able then to get an outcome, a numeric outcome that's going to tell me how accurate you were to put the visual and the auditory together. So when he did both hands, the score was 395. Ideally, we want to score under 100. The lower the number is, the more accurate you are. So both hands, both sides of the body coming together, just the upper body, we got 395. Now we're going to look at cross crawl. Left hand, right foot, 279. Right hand, left foot, 223. Balance, standing on the right foot, 343. Balance on the left, 342. Then the last one is the both hands with guide sounds, meaning to give you another auditory interruption, that if you're going a little too fast, the tone of the bell is different. If you're going a little too slow, the tone of the bell is different. And he got 262. So those are relatively high numbers. When I start to put the whole person together, I can see the struggle because you need both sides of your brain to come together. I look to a child's movement because they're closer to the beginning of getting wired up, and movement is everything. When you come in this world, you are fully formed, but you are not fully functioning. Think about a baby for a minute. Can a baby read, write, and do arithmetic? No. Can a baby even stand up in gravity? No. A baby has to go through a whole year of motoring around in order to get the body even to stand up in gravity. So we are always going to look to the movement to help us know, how did you get wired up, so that we know how far back could this potentially go? Where do we have to go? Put that domino back into place so that we can literally help it go forward. Then we looked at some other body movements, checking out the timing between the upper and lower body. And then we did some reflex testing. So one of the tests that I do, it's called the switch test. And you're literally going to set the child up with the opposite leg and arm to each other out in front. Just very simple instructions. Don't overdo it. Don't go put their arms and legs up for them. You want to give the direction and see, can they do it for themselves? So I'll say, go ahead and put one foot out on the mat. Sometimes they go and they put it right on the mat. Sometimes they touch it and pull their foot back. Sometimes they stick it out there like they're kicking and they leave it up in the air. So depending upon what I see, then I'll say, go ahead and put your foot down on the mat. You never want to say you're wrong. You never want to say, no, not like that. You're trying to watch. When it comes to children, you have to have incredible observational skills, because this is what you're looking for. They are adapting. And I just said adaptation doesn't mean that it happens perfectly. So what we have to do is we have to kind of observe, what's your world like? Because they also don't have a point of reference to tell you, hey, you know, when you tell me to do that, My brain just tells me to leave it up in the air. I never even get the idea that I should put it down on the mat. We don't want to navigate it that way because they don't have that inside of them. And so many times I hear adults make opinions about children, and I have to help them and remind them that's what you think. That's your perception because of the numbers of years you've been here and the way you got wired up, but that's not necessarily what they're doing. So we then ask them to put up the opposite hand. So we've got one foot out on the mat. Now we go put out the opposite hand. Oh, and you can have just a variety of responses. They may automatically put up the same arm, same leg. And then you go, no, put that one down, put up the other one. Again, you never tell them that they're wrong. They may sit there and go back and forth with their arms like they're not really sure which one's opposite. They may even ask you, and you just say, hey, you do. You just do whatever one you think it is. And then you can go either, yes, that's it, or no, go ahead and put that one down and put the other one up. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add momentum. And so the instruction is, what I want you to do is I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, clap my hands, and I want you to jump and switch your arm and leg. So now there's some things going on in their mind. Okay, there's some directions coming at me, but I go really loud with my clap, and before they even expect it, I go switch. And now I've taken them out of the control of their body, because we have a lot of kids that really believe they should perform. And if they have enough time, they can navigate it, but you're not really seeing the true movement. So sometimes they'll get it and it'll look great. Other times when they jump, they'll automatically go same arm, same leg. Well, that's related back to a reflex called asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. That reflex was in the womb. It was part of the birth process, but it should have been integrated before your child ever crawled. This particular reflex, for the podcast audience, is literally going to split you right down the middle. And when you turn your head, the arm and leg on that side are going to go out. So I'm turning my head to the right. That arm, right leg would automatically, reflexively go out. So back up a little bit. Remember, we've been talking about midline here, right? And the other pieces go with this midline, like tongue tie. Tongue tied is most likely related to an MTHFR mutation, and this poor little guy actually had a double mutation, has a double mutation, which is one of the hardest ones to have, okay? That's a midline issue, okay? Now we've got a TNR midline. And remember, we talked about the lateral columns of the brain getting organized. When that reflex is meant to be around, then those lateral column developments are occurring. But again, it should integrate before you begin to crawl, because then what you're going to do is you're going to start crossing over your information. When you do opposite arm and leg, information is traveling up the cord to the brain and crossing over, and vice versa down the cord. So the movement is literally training the brain in order to be able to make those connections on both sides of the body. So if we're doing the switch test and this child goes into same arm, same leg, that reflex is still in control. Which means it doesn't mean that they didn't crawl. They may have had a little funky shape to their crawl. They may have low tone where their elbows are really bowing inward. They may have a hard time just navigating the position, but if you give them enough time, they can do it. But you would be able to find something that is going to trip up the execution of the movement. And it's not like you're intentionally trying to trip them up, but when you're looking at neurology, a lot of this stuff, you know, people are going around in their bodies every day trying to adapt, and they're trying to hold themselves together. And sometimes you just can't see it unless you begin to fatigue the system. So that's what we would be able to do by giving lots of instruction, getting that momentum going. Sometimes I'll even ask the kids when I'm doing maybe quadruped or dead bug, if I can tell it's a very rigid type of a movement, I'll make them say the alphabet, and then I'll say, okay, now put the opposite side down or the other side down. And on the switch test, on the quadruped, and on the dead bug for this little guy, it was all homolateral movements. So even if I just take a look at the timing from the assessment, the mechanical movements associated with core, I know that there is a problem with both sides of the brain talking to each other. And so you have the ability, even when things are not emotionally okay, you have the balance, you should have the balance of both sides of your brain, which tells you, okay, this may not feel good, I don't like this, but this is the way I'm supposed to handle it. So we've got the positive left, the negative right, and they're supposed to work together in order to balance out our emotions. And then even in previous podcasts, we've talked about the whole idea of the subconscious mind and it being developed from womb to about 7.5, 8.5 years. And so these children of ours are little acorns. And when we have had any emotional dysregulation, and sometimes it can just be things that you're going through. Sometimes it can be things we're all going through, like the last almost 3 years, and our children are being impacted by the energy of our own emotional states, and they're learning. So it's very important that we keep that in mind as we try to regulate and navigate our little ones. As we moved on in the assessment, we're looking at hearing. When you are born, you hear low frequency sound and acquire middle and high over those first 3 years. And again, everything that goes on in that developmental period is influenced by everything. So development of auditory, you've also got your gut and your immune system at the same time. What did this little guy have? Earaches, ear tubes. So what happened auditorially? So you should be able to hear sound conducting through the air longer than bone. And in his particular profile, low frequency was okay, but middle and high, he was hearing bone more than air, which could turn up many different things. It could turn up interfering with his reading and comprehension. It could interfere with his speech. It could interfere with how he's able to see and hear and put those messages together. That's why these open windows of development, when children truly are developing, it is so important for us to look at what's happening. When we got to his eye movements, he was seeing double, which when we've got a school-age kid seeing double, well, that's going to be another whole layer of stress on its own. So immediately we're going to refer to a pediatric ophthalmologist or optometrist for that child to be evaluated for ocular acuity. So that's how the eyes are actually seeing. I can work on ocular motor, how the eyes move. And they have such a far-reaching impact. And we found that there was a dysregulation of smoothness as he went from right up to left down. And then we did a vestibular test, which what's supposed to happen is we should be able to spin and get the eyes to go into a movement pattern. And when they don't go into a movement pattern, it's showing that even if I was directed to focus on something, I couldn't put the brakes. I couldn't inhibit that automatic nystagmus movement of the eyeballs, because the eyeballs are attached to the vestibular system. But remember what's in our history: ear tubes, earaches. These are also very common patterns that I have found in practice over the last 27 years. If these things are going on in those first 3 years of life, it really impacts the neurology. So having neuroimmune or immune problems, earaches, etc., it can become a neuroimmune problem. So those were some of the pieces that we found. And we had quite a journey. We had a lot of things we had to work on. But one of the greatest things that happened for this young man is we also did full labs, and we found out all the pieces that needed to be brought together. He was low cholesterol, and I'll highlight that in a moment. We had, I would probably say, a modest amount of food sensitivities, which are going to say that my gut is not necessarily healthy. When you're looking at food sensitivities, you know, you're looking at things like green bean, oranges, cantaloupe. I mean, these are things that they're not unhealthy, but if I have a sick belly, I'm going to react. And then if I eat the same foods all the time, I'm going to react. Well, what we found was he had parasites, so we had to get that cleaned out. And we also had numerous nutritional deficiencies, which I know most parents feed their children well. Most of them do. But why, if you are, why would I have so many deficiencies where biotin, B12, alpha lipoic acid, chromium, coenzyme Q10, serine, a variety of the B vitamins, vitamin E, and vitamin K2. Well, that's a lot for a little person. And so again, it's just another confirmation that my belly is sick. And if I am harvesting parasites, then I can guarantee you that the belly is sick. Now, let's just talk about cholesterol for just a minute before we wrap this up for today. You know, cholesterol's really been given a very bad rap. And you make 80% of the cholesterol that your body needs. It's only 20% that comes from your diet. And that cholesterol, it's made in your liver. And it's used for a variety of things, but let's just put them under a few umbrellas: stress chemicals, reproductive chemicals, and the neurotransmitters for your brain, which we also did later on. I don't automatically jump to a neurotransmitter test, but in this situation, we had a lot of emotional dysregulation, and I wanted to see what were the neurotransmitters doing. And if that cholesterol is low, well, one, I'm either in a stress response all the time, and I'm using my cholesterol in order to handle all the stressors, which we do a stress response evaluation, and I can validate that he was in chronic stress on top of it. So even that one pillar of chronic stress can lead to a complete disruption in the chemistry. But the good news is that you can turn this around. But the child has got to be part of the equation. This is not something that you move around a child and hope they never really realize what you're doing. In order for the child to change, the child has to be an active participant. And in fact, what was so interesting, he mastered his movements beautifully. Most of the time, I would say it's a very small percentage that have a hard time getting their movements. But when they are older, school age, but I got to tell you, I got a 5-year-old right now who can move perfectly, but has a ton of emotional dysregulation. But movement, we mastered that very, very quickly. But one of the very key factors that help this little guy more than anything is putting in that neuro and biofeedback. And recently I've heard some people talk about that neuro and biofeedback is not for children. And I would tell you, being a pediatric specialist, it very much is for children. When a child is not in their body, I would not start with neurofeedback. But once that child is in their body and can do all those movement pieces, and the maps are showing us that they've got dysregulation, especially along the midline of the brain, well, we want to change that pattern. And just like using the interactive metronome, they get a little bar on the bottom of the screen that red on the left, you're going too fast, red on the right, you're going too slow. It's feedback. The same thing happens in biofeedback and neurofeedback. Most of the time, we just work on breathing with children with biofeedback. And they'll do that to where they work up to 10 minutes. They don't start there. They start maybe, well, it depends. It depends how quickly they fatigue, because you never train a faulty pattern. And then they build up, but every one of them get up to 10 minutes. Can you imagine being a child that actually knows how to breathe, meaning that you can engage your own diaphragm, which means that you're stimulating your own vagus nerve and you're re-regulating yourself? I can't even begin to tell you how many children's lives have been changed just by learning how to breathe correctly. Then you add the neurofeedback. They're sitting there, their conscious mind is enjoying the show. Their subconscious is picking up the pattern of the visual and the auditory. And before you know it, focus is happening because they're practicing it right there in real time. And we see the results every single day. All right, well, I'll wrap it up for now. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you got some amazing pearls that for yourself, your child, or for somebody that you love. And I know these are going to be going out throughout the month of December and maybe the first part of January. So if you do hear it, I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year. If you want to reach out and ask me a question, go over to the website, connectmybrain.com, and we have a form that you can fill out. Let me know the times that you're available so that we can connect faster. And right now, unfortunately, we got a little glitch going on with the phone. So feel free to just use that form rather than trying to confuse everybody with two numbers right now. Maybe we'll tell you about that one later, but we'll get our phone back very shortly. You can always send me a message through Connect My Brain on Facebook, or you can email me. My email is Dr. Laura, DRLAURA, at drlaurahanson.com. Dr. Laura, and Hanson is HANSON.com. Thanks so much for tuning in and be blessed.